You've seen the big plays.
Jaron stepping to his right, looking, stopping, firing, end zone, touchdown!
You've heard what the playmakers and coaches have had to say.
Up press Graves, got it!
But now it's time to go behind the mic with BYU sports broadcasters to get their distinctive take on the games.
Oh, what an aggressive play!
This is Behind the Mic with host Cleon Wall.
On today's show, Amy Gant shares her journey into broadcasting after a stellar career as a BYU volleyball player. She also talks about what it takes to become the perfect middle blocker and the tough early season schedule for the women's volleyball team. But first, David Nixon currently works in commercial real estate, but most BYU football fans know him as a former Cougar and NFL linebacker and one of the analysts on BYUtv. And the move to breaking down games on television was not that easy.
It was difficult in the sense that I didn't get really much training. I wasn't a broadcast major. In fact, I didn't even do a minor in it. But, it's something I always enjoyed doing was talking about football. And so for me, naturally, when BYUtv contacted me almost 10 years ago now, I thought, hey, that could be kind of a fun little, hobby, if you will, and jump in and talk about some football. And so sure enough, 10 years later, still doing it. And, for me, it's I guess the easy part of it has been the fact that you're just talking football. And the hope that, we bring as analysts is that we dumb down the game a little bit to where people who aren't familiar with the game can learn from us. But at the same time, we give enough detail that people that are experienced with the game feel like they're getting some valuable insight. And so I think that's the always tricky part with an analyst is making sure you're speaking to the masses, but also providing good content that people will value and, that will make them tune in time after time.
So in trying to help those fans out that are looking for something that maybe they don't see, what's the first thing you do when you analyze a game? Like just, for example, like the Baylor game, when you started just looking at that game in real time, what's the first thing you analyze? And I do have to ask, do you gravitate towards defense since you played defense?
I do a little bit gravitate towards defense, but offensively, it's funny, right? As a defensive player, I'm looking at the defensive line mostly to begin with and see what type of surge or because typically a whole defense is predicated upon the defensive line. If the defensive line's getting washed out play after play, they're just going to run it down your throat and then they're going to do a play action and gash you. And so I tend to look at both the offense and defensive line. How good is the protection on the front end for the offensive line, right? And so I gravitate towards defense, but I also, because I'm always watching defense, I have to have a pretty good grasp of the offense as well, right? And so I try to look at both the kind of front lines and then from there work your way back. And so that's kind of my methodology. But for me it's a blast. I love watching the film because once again, football was such a big part of my life for 27 years or whatever until I was done playing. Football was a huge part of my life, and that's a tough thing about football is once football is over for these guys, you don't really go out and play pickup football on the weekends. Right? Yeah. So you're kind of done, and I feel like this opportunity for me to be an analyst on BYUtv has helped me kind of stay in the game a little bit and tap into that passion that I had for so many years.
Well, let's talk about the BYU Cougars, especially since you were able to watch the Baylor game live, also see the film on it. But I don't know which one to go with first. So you've heard the cliche, I've got good news and bad news, and I want to play into that cliche a little bit and what you want to talk about first. So do you want to talk about the good stuff first or the bad stuff first?
We can talk about the bad stuff first. Let's get it out of the way.
Okay. All right. I wanted to focus on the running game. Christopher Brooks, 31 yards rushing. Longest run was 6 yards. Lopini Katoa, 26 yards rushing. His longest run was 7 yards. These guys really couldn't find their groove. As you're watching this game, what did you notice?
Listen, I think Baylor's defensive front seven, specifically their defensive line, probably is going to be the best defensive line BYU faces all season. That was a really stout group that had us scouted pretty well. I was a little surprised not to see the big of a push from BYU's offensive line as I thought I would see, given the experience and given the big boys BYU has up front. And so there's no question, they struggled trying to run the ball and getting chunk plays. Frankly, the best running came from Jaron Hall on a couple quarterback keepers throughout the night, and that's something that Jaron brings to the table as well. And frankly, I know that most fans don't want to see Jaron run the ball given his health history. But maybe that's something you got to work in a little bit more and tell him to be smart, because that does open up the rest of the running game as well. When you have the RPO and you have to respect the quarterback keeping it, that takes kind of one less defender out of the box. And so, I think that was maybe one of the downsides, was the running game never could quite get going. But it was effective when it needed to be, and picked up a few first downs. And like I said, Jaron was able to beat Baylor's defense with his legs as well.
This is what Connor Pay had to say about facing Baylor's defense, and especially with the offensive line, how they did against them.
Yeah, I think obviously we didn't do as good a job as we could have in the run game, and that's our responsibility as an offensive line. And so I think we just need to do a better job of starting and sustaining our combo blocks and getting to the second level, because like you said, Oregon has a great defense.
Can you really blame or attribute all the blame, I guess you could say, to the offensive line?
I think there's some room to go all around. I think even you go to the coaching staff and dial up certain plays that will work against that Baylor front, 4 front 7. And so I think, keeping the defense on the heels is a huge part as well. Not being predictable is another huge important part that coaches play a role in. And so I think it's a team effort for sure. I don't think you can pin it all on one position group, because ultimately, if the running backs, you've got to lower your shoulder and you have some cutbacks and find holes, even though they might not be there. And so I think it falls on everybody. But yeah, it starts with the offensive line up front, no question. And you could hear that from Pay right there, where they know they've got to get better at that. But once again, I don't think this team, maybe until Arkansas, I don't know if they face another stout defensive line like they faced last week.
Why didn't BYU's passing game lighten the load for the rushing attack? Is it because it's so high risk and you're like, well, if we give up big yards here, that's just a risk you're going to take, and we're going to take that risk?
Yeah, I think the passing game got on track. It was kind of a back and forth. I think that first quarter, really into the second quarter, both teams were trying to fill each other out. And I think they were trying a lot of different plays. BYU's first drive, offensively, they came out firing. Baylor made some good adjustments. And then BYU was able to kind of rebound later in the second quarter whenever they had the touchdown scoring drive on the last drive. But between the first drive and that last drive of the first half, it was pretty back and forth, a lot of 3 and outs, not a lot of success. And I mean, sometimes this is how it goes. Not every game is going to be a barn burner where it's going to be 55-52. You're going to have some defensive struggle or offensive struggles against these stout defenses. And I think that was one of these type of games where, both offenses, Baylor's and BYU's, were trying different concepts, trying to find some big play chunks. I will say, I think missing Gunner and Puka, who are true deep threats, I think that hurt BYU a little bit there in the first half. But ultimately, Chase Roberts obviously caught fire, and he gained that kind of started to get some bigger chunk plays against that Baylor defense. But it was a struggle there in the first half, no doubt.
Were you getting nervous at all that the defense would wear down? Because you just talked about, there were quite a few 3 and outs and stalled drives in that first half. Were you getting nervous at all that maybe the defense would start to wear down as the game went along?
Honestly, yes. I mean, this once again, I almost had PTSD from last year's game where Baylor eventually just kept cramming it down BYU's throat and rushed for over 300 yards. And so I thought at some point that defense was going to bend and frankly break. But credit to them, credit to BYU's defensive line and linebackers, and frankly even the safeties in secondary. We broke it down on AFR this last week, a couple of days ago, where BYU had corners coming up and hitting. He had, of course, linebackers. Max Tooley with probably the best game of his career. Defensive line played great. I would still love to see them be a little bit more stout at the point of attack. There are a couple of times where they're getting driven back a little bit. But I thought as a total defense, man, it was a fantastic outing. And what they were able to do to keep Baylor just 152 yards. I mean, for Baylor, that's a pretty low output. They love to run the ball, especially Jeff Grimes. And BYU's able to kind of take that away from them. They averaged under 3 yards per carry, which is a win.
And that's called a professional transition, folks. David knows exactly when we want to talk about the good stuff, and that's the defense. The defense did what they needed to do to win this game. Here's what Ben Bywater had to say.
I was proud of our guys, the way we handled kind of battling up front, playing big boy football, smash mouth, downhill run game. So for us, I mean, we had a lot to prove, especially after what happened last year. So I was proud of the way the guys, handled business, and it's just a testament to what we did in the off season, getting big and just having that pride. So I was proud of us.
Both Ben and you talked about how BYU gave up lots of yards last season when they played Baylor. Also gave up 38 points last year. This past game, only 20 points. You saw these guys last season and now this season. Are they really just bigger, stronger, faster, and playing, as he said, big boy football?
I think they are, but I think more than anything, I mean, they are bigger, faster, stronger, no question. But I think more than anything, they're smarter, and I think this off season and experience they now have underneath their belts is now paying dividends here because you watch them. We always talk about this in football. When you're experienced and you know what your assignment is, you play so much faster. If there's any type of indecision in your brain at the snap of the ball, whether where you're supposed to go or what run fit you're supposed to have or what pass drop and what zone you're supposed to drop into, you're going to be 1 to 2 seconds slower, which, as we know in the game of football, it's a game of inches. And if you're not in your spot where you need to be, especially against a good quarterback and a good team like Baylor, they're going to pick you apart. But this BYU defense, they were in the right fits. I mean, there was. We went back and watched it. There's maybe 1 or 2 plays where guys didn't quite fit. When I say fit, when they come up to blocks, maybe they're on the inside of the block versus they're supposed to be on the outside of the block. That's what run fits are called. They were almost spot on the entire night, and you saw it. I mean, guys were flying around, getting off blocks and being in the right position they were supposed to be in, and coming up with big plays. And so I agree. I think. There's no doubt everyone's healthy, which is a big key, right? I mean, BYU faced Baylor, I think it was game 7 last year, game 8. This year, obviously, game 2, and everyone was healthy. But I think more than anything, it's the prep and the intelligence of all these guys and one more year of experience of understanding the defense and understanding where they need to be.
Ben Bywater also kind of talked about that, how it wasn't just being able to beat their guys on defense.
A lot of it was the scheme. Our coaches did a great job putting us in good positions to, make plays.
What did the Cougars do differently, David, with their scheme to make big plays? It seemed like they blitzed more, and I know BYU fans have been crying about that, but it seemed like they blitzed more. What did you notice as you were watching the game?
Yeah, I think last year, because of the result of injuries, and they were dealing with a lot of backups at that point, they maybe didn't have the experience and the trust of the coaches to come out with some exotic blitzes. Because once again, if you blitz and you don't get home, you're leaving your whole deep back end exposed, right? And so it's kind of it's a tough call. But this year, once again, with everyone with the experience come back and with the trust gained of the coaching staff, BYU was blitzing a linebacker on almost every play. Sometimes it's through the A gap, sometimes it's through the C gap. And there were lots of stunts going on up front, which means the defensive line are doing some twists to create some confusion with Baylor's offensive line, which really messes with run blocks if you're an offense. So BYU they were getting creative and they were flying around. I agree. I think the game plan going this game versus sitting on their heels like they did last year and just kind of playing a base defense, BYU opted to be more aggressive. And like I said, almost every play there's a backer blitzing somewhere on that line, and I think that creates some havoc. And Baylor never really had an answer for it throughout the night.
BYU did finish with 4 sacks in the game. As a former linebacker, take us through what it's like sacking the quarterback on a crucial drive.
I mean, listen, there's nothing better. Honestly, you take a sack over anything. I mean, I guess some of those hits that Tully was putting on Baylor, where you come in and you hit your helmet right square in their chest and you drop them to the ground, that's pretty fun. But the sacks, especially like you said, in crucial situations where it's a game changer. I mean, you all of a sudden knock them out of field goal position, or you back them up to where now you're flipping field position. I mean, those sacks are big time game changers, and there's nothing better coming off the edge and seeing that quarterback, and you're just hoping when his back is to, you're just hoping he's going to hold on to that ball 1 extra second to allow you to get home. And as you said, BYU had 4 sacks, which was 4 more than BYU had last year. No sacks for BYU in last year's game. And so that goes to show you the pressure that they were able to apply and how it paid off.
On Baylor's second overtime drive, what do you think the defining moment on defense was that eventually led to that incomplete pass on 4th and goal?
Honestly, it was the false starts. I think that, if they don't do those 2 false starts on 3rd and 4th down, I think this is a whole different result and outcome. Instead, you look at the Rock and the fans and what they're able to do to create that much noise and make them false start. That pushed them into kind of an uncomfortable territory. And as we saw from Baylor's quarterback, Blake Shapen, all night, he struggled with passing the ball. He wasn't very accurate throughout the evening, and especially with pressure in his face. And so BYU opted on that last play to only rush 3 and do their drop 8, which I love at that part of the field. When you're down the red zone, especially on the 12-yard line, you have that 12th defender, which is the out of bounds on the back end, right, of the end zone. And so you've got to take advantage of that extra defender, quote unquote. And so BYU opts to rush 3 and a great job of getting pressure. I think it was Mangelson who made an inside move and got his hand right in his face and made him airball his throw. And, we went back and looked at it on AFR as well. He threw it to the middle receiver, but there was nobody open. Even the outside receivers were blanketed. BYU secondary did a fantastic job, including the linebackers, of taking up and occupying those throwing lanes. And Baylor's quarterback had nowhere to go, and sure enough, resulted in a huge play and game winner.
Gregor Bell on the radio broadcast kept talking about the hockey line changes for the defense to get fresh players on the field. What do you think that did for the defense in keeping them fresh, or even when we're talking about long-term health?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't love the hockey line changes. I mean, I when I played, I never wanted to come out, and I didn't come out very often. We didn't do a lot of that. With that being said, it's working for this group now, and I think a lot of it's situational as well. You want to have your studs on the field in big situations. I think they've done a good job of rotating those guys in and out whenever those situations arise, and so it's working for them. And I think, to your point, it does keep guys fresh throughout the game. So when their number is called, they're ready to go and they can get upfield and provide some pressure. But it is a tough one because you are, swapping out, some of these younger guys for older guys, and vice versa. And maybe you're left a little bit more vulnerable at certain times, but it's working. So I'm not going to complain.
Max Tooley, 13 total tackles. Bywater had 11. Keenan Peely, 6 tackles. You're great for the linebackers in this game.
Yeah, I think they honestly get an A. I don't know how much better they could have done. I think they were fantastic in both the passing game, where they were able to get into, like I said, throwing lanes. I think in the run game, they're phenomenal. I love Peely. He was absolutely flying around. And a lot of it's stuff that you don't see on the stat line, where, linebackers come up and they set the edge and they make the running back cut up inside, and that's where the D tackle is going to clean up, or they make him bounce it because they fit perfectly, and all of a sudden the safety sitting right there is able to take the running back's legs out, so he gets credit to tackle, but really the backer is the one that set it up. And so the backers played really, really well, and you gotta love the luxury of having Tooley, Wilgar, Peely, Bywater, even your backups, Tanavasa. I mean, you've got a lot of faces that played a lot of games for BYU. And once again, I mean, if there's anything positive that came out of last year's, season, where a lot of guys were injured, and once again, you go to the bowl game and you look out there on the field and you literally don't recognize anybody's name. The benefit of that is the fact that all those kids return, most of them return, and that's experience that comes back. And so if there are injuries, or if there are guys that need a blow, right, you can substitute them out and bring in some kids that have some game reps under their belts. Ben
Bywater also said he can't wait to play Oregon.
I'm excited. The big games are what you play for. I mean, no one wants to be playing little small teams that no one shows up to. So primetime football Saturday, 1:30 p.m. It's gonna be big time. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Autzen Stadium should be rocking and rolling coming up this Saturday. And it's a fun place to play. What was your favorite place to go play outside of LaVell Edwards Stadium? What was the place that you didn't like to play in?
Oh man, I loved playing up at Utah. I loved playing in that environment. I mean, that was such a heated and passionate game that I loved playing up at the U. Probably the one place I didn't love to play in was, frankly, probably Wyoming, up in Laramie. And hopefully there's not a lot of Wyoming fans listening to this podcast, but it wasn't the most desirable location. Just the whole trip, you had to stay like 45 minutes outside of Laramie because there weren't any big enough hotels to host the team, and then the fans weren't the kindest, and the weather usually was not the best, and so I'd say Laramie's the worst, but I love playing Utah. I mean, that for me, that's when people talk about doing away with the rivalry, which unfortunately this year is obviously not going to be played. It's a big bummer. I mean, I can promise you the players absolutely love it, and I think that's how college football should be. It should be all about the rivalries, and it's fortunate this year they don't get to play, but. Who knows? Maybe in some bowl game down the road, we'll see.
Was there any one place that you played where it just had no atmosphere at all, or it just felt dead when you would go play there?
Keep in mind, I was playing still in the Mountain West back in my day. I would say probably New Mexico. I mean, New Mexico had struggled. I think they still do struggle, and not a lot of fans there. In fact, almost every time BYU had more fans than New Mexico when we played there. And it was just that was one of those games where you're just kind of hoping to get in and get out, get the job done, get the W, and get back home and move on to the next week. And which is kind of a bummer when you think about it, right? I mean, football, you only have 12, hopefully 13 games a season. And it's kind of unfortunate to waste those on opponents like that. And then going back to Ben Bywater's soundbite, it's a great point. I mean, in Independence, there's some of those games at the end, but the majority of your games are pretty awesome games. I mean, I would have killed to have played back-to-back top 25 opponents. I mean, that never happened in my career. And the fact that they get to do that, this season against down the road Notre Dame and Arkansas, I mean, big-time teams, man, it's such a blast. And then, of course, them going to the Big 12, even more fun. But, pretty fortunate. As Bywater says, I mean, I'm with him. I would rather play at Oregon versus some FCS opponent and beat up on them. I would love to, play stiff competition and try to prove to the whole nation and country that you are what you are and you're worthy of your ranking.
David Nixon, thanks for joining Behind the Mic. We'll get you on later this season.
Yep, appreciate it. Thanks, Cleon.
Coming up next, Amy Gant gives us insights into broadcasting volleyball and this year's Cougar team. Welcome back to Behind the Mic. I'm Cleon Wall. Amy Gant had a stellar career as a BYU volleyball player and has also had a nice career as a volleyball broadcaster for BYUtv, NBC, ESPN, and other media entities. Amy says her perspective didn't change much when she stopped playing and started analyzing.
I think they really go together. And so I was really fortunate. I felt happy that, my thousands of years and time on a volleyball court chasing a ball around could actually kind of merge into something else. And so I felt like, you spend that much time watching the game and analyzing the game as a player and practicing, then that vision is kind of trained more. And so it was really great to kind of work my way into that position as an analyst. And so I think my volleyball knowledge was definitely there. And then obviously the broadcasting aspect of it is definitely a learning curve that I had to develop over time that I'm hopefully still developing. But it ended up being just the best transition for me. It was great.
When did you first start being an analyst on TV? And did you just kind of like slip into it and you're like, yeah, this feels natural? Or was there kind of a learning curve there too?
Yeah. Well, it was actually really great. I think BYU has always had, fantastic opportunities. And although initially when I first started school, I was thinking about majoring in it, but then for some reason, I don't know why I didn't, but so I didn't actually do any schooling at BYU per se, but I did have relationships just with different members of the media, just from them covering our games. And so after I finished with the national team, I kind of reached out to them, and fortunately they were in need of an analyst. And, as I've learned through way too many years in this business, it's probably like every other business. It's as much luck as it is skill. And so you kind of just have to always try to be out there and be ready and then wait for those opportunities. So I was fortunate to be able to, I wouldn't say slide right in, but it was a good opportunity right when I left the national team to be able to try out work as a color commentator analyst.
When you are getting ready to broadcast a volleyball match, And when it starts, what is it that you pay attention to the most on the court? What is it that you hone in early on the match to feel like, yeah, I've got a feel for what's going on?
Right. So I think a lot of that stuff would be prior to the match. I think it's really important. I try to make sure I know the teams really well, that I've talked to the coaches, that I've, watched them if possible. So that there's specific storylines that I'm looking for, or different challenges that I think the game is going to go in, as these two teams play each other. What are we kind of looking for? And I think my job is to pass those on to the viewer, to maybe point out things that through my years of playing, I might notice, but then someone who's just a regular fan, may not see. And then if you can point those things out, then it's kind of exciting, because you get to know the game at a deeper level, and you get to kind of get to know those players and the situations more. I also think it's really fun being in the gym, because it's amazing. And this was something I think when I first started, I was probably more along the lines of I would say just exactly what happened. I think that's what a lot of people fall into, and they just kind of repeat what just happened, when you're reminded everyone is watching for a reason, and they see what happened. So you need to really talk about what they might not notice, what led to that play. Or I like watching how the game is feeling, and the tension in the gym, and the momentum swings, because it's amazing how palpable that really is when you're in the venue.
We're still fairly early in BYU's volleyball season, but they played a tough schedule so far. What have you noticed early in this season with this year's BYU volleyball squad?
Well, yeah, tough schedule is right, man. They really have tested themselves. And I think that's fantastic. So that a lot of teams, especially when you're in, like a team in the Big 12, let's say, which is the best conference in the country, they know that day in and day out, when they get into conference, they're going to be facing the top teams in the country. BYU has to really walk a fine line in figuring out how tough to play their preseason, and then also survive conference, so they can put themselves in the best position come NCAA tournament time. So preseason is always a good chance to see the best and play the best, so you can learn as much as you can, and you can make changes to hopefully be in a good situation come November, December. So wow, for them to play, 3 top 10 teams in a row is pretty challenging, and I'm sure they've learned a lot.
Do you agree that it was good for them to do this? Because I could look at this and say, hey, it's good we're playing these teams. It teaches the players exactly what they're going to need to do to succeed and to be able to make the NCAA tournament. On the other hand, you lose a few of these games in a row, and that's, maybe, affecting your psyche a little bit too. Where do you fall along the lines of good or bad scheduling, so tough so early?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think what's hard is that everyone would love to schedule after you've played preseason, and then we all get together and schedule. But, as you know, and football, obviously is even worse. You have to make a decision 2 years, 3 years in the future. And sometimes things come together where it's like, oh, we're going to do a home and away, but we're not going to do it this year. We're doing it next year. And so I think the schedule itself, they don't really know what they've got until they get it. And then they don't know what team they're going to put up against it. And so I think that becomes really hard. And so I think you probably just embrace whatever you can of the benefits of it, because your point's right. You want to maintain that momentum and the confidence level, and also learn. But if I'm a coach, I want to embrace the tough schedule and say, hey, this will make us better come spring or come November, when we're getting into NCAAs.
Last year's squad was so dominant. Only 2 losses on the entire season, and that last loss was in the NCAA tournament. How much do you think that weighs on this year's team?
I'm not sure. I think it may have weighed on them initially coming into it, but then you just dive right into all these incredible matches. and you're kind of in a new situation completely. I think if they've had a chance, they get to go back and they get to play Pitt again. They're playing, they played Georgia Tech, they played Ohio State. So they're swimming in a lot of stuff right now. I don't think they're thinking about last season at all. They're probably just thinking, man, we play Utah on Thursday, and how are we going to get through that?
This is Heather Olmstead's 8th season with this team, and we know that she's the coach, and she's done a fantastic job so far with BYU. But who have you noticed as the on-court leader for this squad?
That's a good question. I think personalities certainly lend themselves to leadership positions, but sometimes based on the position you play, you're kind of forced into that position as well. I think setters in general are ones that, they touch the ball half the time, every other time. They're really dictating the offense. They're making all the decisions. Most people don't notice all the stuff that they're doing. We look and we see the big hitters, and that's super fun to talk about, the really athletic swings and powerful serves, but the setter in general is very much the glue that holds a team together. And I think Whitney Bower's been in a tough and a good position. She's definitely earned it her entire career, in that she is a setter of a team and has to lead the team, has to be a person. When you're a setter, you have to have a personality, I think, that where people want to play for you and they want to get out on the floor and work hard. And I think she shows that work ethic. And I think her team definitely knows that she wants it and she wants to do the best she can. And I think that helps them to then, get behind that and really try to, improve at the level she's improving as well. So probably Whitney Bower, just based on, she's a setter. She's a 3-4-year starter. And she's like, 19, 20 now. It's weird that she's a senior, but one of the veterans on the team. And I think having a senior setter is pretty fantastic. I don't think you can be an elite level team and not have a setter that knows their way around the court and how to run an offense.
Being a guy who has mainly played just backyard volleyball, and I'm not good at that, I watch Whitney and I look at how she, what I would term as kind of directs things, especially when it's coming on the attack. How does she determine, because I don't know how you do this, but how does she determine, or how do setters determine who should they set it to? How is that communicated to her teammates?
Yeah, good question. I think in the moment, it comes down to, hours and hours of watching video and talking with your players and knowing what sets to set and knowing how to develop an offense, and then making a split-second decision. So you're gonna know a setter's job is to put the ball in the best position for their hitters. So first and foremost, they've got to locate the ball well. And ideally, if you can get a one-on-one situation for your hitters, that's going to be the best option for them to then get a kill. And so what the setters are trying to develop is running plays and running different options that will open those holes in the block, those seams, and then find, the best player who's the hot hand at the moment. There's so many little things that have to go into what comes down to split-second choices and decisions based on the pass you get. And so I think that's what's fascinating about the game, is that it's never, besides the serve, it's never the same. You don't know what you're always making decisions on the fly, and you're incorporating everyone on the floor. And so it's just a fantastic team sport, in my opinion.
What do you look for in a good middle blocker, and how are Heather Knighting and Whitney Laranis stacking up right now as a tandem of middle blockers for this BYU volleyball team?
That's a great question. I think a lot of times it used to be you just stick the tallest person in the middle. You're the tallest. Let's put you in the middle because you're going to be involved in a bunch of blocks, and we want a big block in front of us. But I think kind of what teams are realizing, and we've seen a little difference over the past, I don't know, 5 years or so, is really recognizing that a good middle blocker needs to have the ability to move laterally really quickly. And so just sticking the tallest person in the middle isn't always your best choice. You have to be a player that can look at the set coming, can be very quick to make decisions, and then move laterally very quickly. So you want to be twitchy is what I've heard it called, that those fast twitch. You got to be twitchy. You got to get to the outside. You've got to get off the net. You've got to get up and ready. So there's a lot of movement involved. And I think looking at a player, I guess specifically in Heather Knighting, she's a player who is tall and physical and strong, but she also moves laterally really, really well and can get off and up the net. Off the net and then up and ready to swing quickly. And so she's a wonderful middle blocker in that regard because she's so versatile, but also really tall and physical.
We mentioned Heather Olmstead, that this is her 8th season as a coach. She's taken the Cougars to 5 Sweet 16 appearances and 6 conference titles. That's amazing in 8 years. Why has she been so successful? Why is she able to be successful with not only the girls she's able, well, I guess I could say in recruiting, and then also getting the most out of the girls or the players who come here?
Yeah, I think that's great. Longevity is pretty amazing. It's one thing to be successful, for a couple of years when you've got 1 or 2 really good players that you can ride through that. But her ability to be able to reload every year and bring in top talent is pretty fantastic. I think the BYU volleyball name in general is just very well respected. Heather as a coach, obviously her involvement in USA stuff and national team and coaching, all those things just has put her right up there with, the top coaches in the country. And I think a lot of people want to come to play for a team that they know will be good year in and year out, and to play in an environment with the support of fans and the school is really unique. I think BYU is a place that just, obviously I'm biased, but it is a really special environment and place to go.
Amy, thanks so much for joining us here on Behind the Mic, and hopefully we can get you on a little bit later this season too.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
Thanks again to David Nixon and Amy Gant for joining us on Behind the Mic. We'd love it if you would download and listen to the show on the BYU Radio app or anywhere you get podcasts. Behind the Mic is a production of BYU Radio.